yourself. Yeah, you come down here. Do this order. So. Okay, we're standing. We are extra.
All right.
No. We extra.
All right, let's introduce our panelists for tonight. All right, so our first panelist is Douglas. Let's give Douglas a hand. Yeah. This has always been a dream of Douglas to sit on a panel. And then we have Stephanie. Hello, Stephanie. And then we have Mington. And then we have Jessica. Wait, where'd Jess go? Oh, there. Yeah, hi, Jess. And then we have Leanne. And then we have Kathy, Matthew, Yan, Nancy, and Joseph.
Wow. Oh. You want one? Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Welcome everyone to our sharing night. So we went to Guatemala, August 18 to 28. And tonight we're just going to share with you guys of our trip and what God has taught us, what we saw. But during the whole thing, like, think of questions you guys want to ask us, and so we'll have a Q&A afterwards. So we're going to each share a little something about what we did there and what we learned from it. And afterwards there'll be Q&A. But during the whole thing, you can go get up and get some cookies or fruits or refreshments. So, yeah.
I also just wanted to thank everyone for coming out. We thank you so much again for your prayers prior to the trip, during the trip, after the trip. Is very much needed, and very excited. We're all very excited to share what God's been doing down in Guatemala and what God might have been speaking to us individually on our trip as well. So thank you so much. Anything else you want to say before we start? Oh. We're just gonna step into a word of prayer. Lord Jesus, you are good. Your love endures forever, God. We thank you for your grace. We thank you for your mercy that it's new every morning. We thank you that we get to spend this evening just in your church body, Lord. Not that it's a building, Lord, with your church as a people, Lord. To be able to encourage one another, build one another up for your kingdom, God, and just to be able to share on our hearts what you've been doing in our lives, this leading up to the trip or during the trip, and just exposing not exposing, but just sharing and showing what the culture of Guatemala is like for our team, and what everyone's support, prayer, financial support, other means of support have done, Lord. But ultimately, we're here to give glory, praise, and thanks to you, God. For without you, none of this would be possible. So we lift this evening up to you. We love you and we thank you, Lord. In your name we pray. Amen.
Okay, first. So that was a picture of just some context. We went to school and then it was our hugging line for the kids, but we'll get into that.
Okay, so on the very first day that we arrived in Guatemala City, and we were picked up by the Les and Rita Peters, who are the actual founders of Impact Ministry. So they came all the way from Tactique, which is about 3 to 5 hour car ride away to pick us up. And we had stayed in Guatemala City the night that we arrived. And then the next day they took us to kind of tour the city and gave us a background of the history, how Guatemala has started and kind of where it's at right now, just so that we were kind of educated on what we were going into. So Guatemala, he told us a lot of history about how Guatemala started, and it was really different compared to how Canada started. And so how he compared, or how Les compared it to us, was that Canada was built in a way that they wanted to come to Canada and build a nation and to have it prosper and to actually have people settle there. But Guatemala started a little differently. The people who were initially there were like were the Mayan people, which is like our First Nations, and then Spain sent the people over there to, what he said was, conquer the land. So take all of the goods, whatever they could make profit out of basically, and send it back to Spain. So how it started wasn't in hopes of building a actual nation to prosper, but to steal from them and then send everything back to Spain. So through that, Guatemala has experienced a lot of kind of political and social poverty, I guess, in a way, because no one actually wanted to take care of the people there. So the Guatemalan people are like a mix of the Mayan people and the Spanish people who came and took over their land. They just suppressed them until they submitted and then took all their stuff and left. And so through that, they have 2 classes there. They have a really wealthy 5% class who own majority of the land and basically control the market. And then the rest is a lower class. So like 95% of the people who live in Guatemala are part of the lower class. While compared to Canada, we do have the upper 5%, which is wealthy, but we have a large middle class, which is where majority of the majority of people are, and then we have a lower class as well. So in comparison, it'd be like everybody here is kind of homeless and living on like $5 a day, which is really sad. And so there was, a lot of poverty that we saw. And another thing with Guatemala is the religion is a really big part of their culture and what they do. So originally they had their Mayan religions, which is a lot of animism, which is giving life to inanimate things. So they worshipped a lot of they worshipped the sun god, they worshipped the corn god, which Matt will get into later, but basically they had a god for everything. And when the Spanish came in, or the people from Spain came, they brought along with them Catholicism, which is what was the religion of Europe at the time. And so they forced all of the Mayan people to also practice Catholicism. But they didn't actually stop them from their own religion. They just kind of combined everything. So in a lot of the churches, you'll have like pictures and statues of like the saints and of Jesus, but behind it you'll see like the sun and like stars and like all of like corn, so that when they're like worshiping or like praying to it, they're kind of praying to all of the gods at the same time. And so they have a very skewed version of what and who God is, in that it's kind of everybody and it's all religions really. So that's kind of the background of it. Another cultural thing that kind of shocked me was their marriage, or the way that the men thought. So in Guatemala, men have a lot of families. They don't actually marry the women there. They just go have kids with the girls that they're currently with, because they believe that divorce is sin. And so they don't actually have to marry the women. They just start families, and then when they're bored, they move on to the next one and start another family without actually having to divorce them. So it's not a sin in, I guess, their minds. But so then it's really sad to see, like, in the schools we were told that there would be, like, multiple families from the same dad in, like, the same class or, like, in the same school, where they would have to see each other. And so a lot of the students experience, like, abandonment from their dad, and then seeing their dad's other family where he's still there was something that a lot of the students had to face. And I noticed that the idea of, like, marriage was very, I guess, what Impact Ministry wants to teach them, because during, like, our church service, like, they made a point to ask all of the husbands to, like, hug their wives and, like, tell them they're sorry for all of the things that they've done, and to apologize to them and tell them how much they love them. And, like, everybody did it. And I thought that was really weird, because we don't do that here. And, like, all the, like, wives were crying, and, like, they're just, like, hugging their husband, and, like, it was really sweet. And that's sort of, like, the moment when I realized, like, that their idea of marriage is so different than ours. And I think that's one of the great things that Impact is doing, is they're also teaching, like, the boys in the school at the young age. Like, they're like, how many wives are you gonna have forever? They're like, one forever. And then they go to the girls, they're like, how many husbands are you gonna have? And they're like, one husband forever. And I don't know if that's, like, brainwashing, but I thought it was really, like, cute that they were doing that, because the way, like, their families, or the way, like, all their other families are run isn't like that. So yeah, that was, like, one of the big cultural things I thought was cool. On to the next slide. So we did construction. This was, like, really difficult for me, because I've never done, like, a single day of labor in my life, and it was, like, really hard. And Les even told us before we went that, like, you're not, like, the construction that you're doing is not actually, like, probably that helpful. I mean, they could pay someone really cheap, and they probably do it a lot faster than us and better than us. But he told us that why we were doing construction is that people there, the women there, will see you working, and they'll question why women are working, because the guys working is normal, but when they see, like, the girls working, they'll question why. And that opens an opportunity for Impact to come in and say, like, you know, these people came all the way from Canada, spent their money, spent their time to come down here and to work to help build a school for, like, your kids. Like, they do that because God loves them, and that God loves you and your family enough to send them here. And so we went into construction with that mindset, and it was, at first, we were doing it when no one was around, because all the kids were in class. So, you know, we were like, our construction project was literally moving 3 piles of dirt into another location, like, literally. So, like, in that bottom photo where Douglas is standing in, like, the blue shirt, we moved dirt from there to where the wheelbarrow on the other side of the photo is. That's it. That's all we did for 3 days. But it was, like, so difficult. And we were so slow, and we were so terrible, and we were complaining, and we were taking, like, breaks every 5 seconds. Most of us. Some of us actually did pretty good. And then, like, when the kids came out from recess, they would come and help us. And that they would come and help us by, like, pushing the wheelbarrow with us. And yeah, well, no, they held us back, because we were like, oh, we don't want them to get hurt, because it was pretty, like, I don't know, it wasn't dangerous, but we just didn't, like, they're just kind of in the way, but we wanted them to help anyways. And that was, like, another thing that I learned about the culture there, is that they really value working. And one of the stories that Les told us that was really cool was there was this family that had a funeral, and they were all bringing chairs, and they had to go through, like, a really narrow alleyway. And so people were carrying like 10 7 chairs on their back so that they could do it quickly. But this little boy wanted to help, and so he like squeezed into the alleyway and picked up one chair so he could move it into the thing. And obviously, like other people, like someone could have carried that chair, but what they wanted to do was like to teach that little boy that working is very important in their culture, and you have to work to contribute to like the family. And so all of like the little boys were coming out to help and work, and we didn't want to take that away from them by being like, oh, go away, like you're kind of in our way. So that was really cool. And even the people who were hosting us, like kind of not our guides, but like our translator and like our host kind of, they would come and help us. And that's like not even part of their job. They were really just supposed to drop us off and leave. But they stayed and helped us, which was really nice. And well, you guys will hear more stories about them through other people, but they were a really integral part of our trip just because we got to know them and know their testimony and just know how much they love God and love serving Him, because they don't have to help us with this construction, and it's hot, and they don't have water either. Like they didn't bring water like we did. And I don't know, construction wasn't like some crazy like evangelistic like thing that we did, but I think that it laid a foundation for Impact to be able to I guess reach more people in the community. So I thought that's something cool that we got to be a part of.
Okay, so I'll talk about sponsorship. So for those that don't know, you can sponsor kids through Impact Ministry, and the sponsorship will go towards their schooling. It's $45 a month, and Les was saying like their uniform or their shoes, that's probably like one of the nicest clothes that they'll own. Just because some of them come from really rough backgrounds. So what we did was, I know some of the members in our church here, they sponsored kids as well. So those that went to the trip like a couple of years ago, they sponsor kids, and so we were able to get presents from them and deliver them. So the picture on your right is Sarah's. That was Sarah's sponsored child, and so we visited him. He was in class, and like they pulled him out, and they, it was like, here's a gift, and all the kids were just like watching through the window, and it's like, what's going on? And so we got to talk to them, and you got to ask them like, like how are you doing? What's your favorite subject in school? What do you do when you grow up? And I know for Sarah, it's very special for her to see like her kid grow up and be able to like accept his present and continue to school and do the education that he's there for. And then, so a couple of us on the trip, we felt compelled to also sponsor kids on the trip. And so they did say that if you do decide to sponsor a kid during your stay, they can make arrangements for you to meet them. So Joe and Yan decided to sponsor, and that's their little kid. What's his name again? Zuriel. And then, so your picture, the picture on your right is the classroom. So Yan actually sponsored a classroom. And yeah, you can actually go there to meet the entire class. And so Yan bought them gifts, and we played games with them. They gave us thank you cards. And so they destroyed us in soccer. What's new? On the top left, that is Laura's sponsored kid. So we also got to meet him and give him his present. And on the bottom, that's Leanne's sponsored kid that she sponsored. Her name is Deborah. And then the picture on your right is Jason's sponsored kid. So we got to meet him. And then top left is Ian's. And the bottom left is my sponsored kid. His name is Hessler. And so it was just really special just being able to meet all these kids. Like they, like they're very shy at first, and then they come out and we have gifts for them, and they like come out and they accept it. And then we're talking to the family, we're getting to know the family a bit more, and all you see is they just want to play with their presents. Like they're just like standing there holding their like coloring book or their stuffy, and they're like wanting to play. Yeah, and it's customary in the Guatemalan culture to open the presents after they leave. So they're just standing there, probably waiting for us to leave because they want to play with their gifts. But fun fact, so when we were sponsoring the kids in Guatemala, Joe and Yen's sponsor kid was supposed to be Leanne's, and then Leanne's sponsor kid was supposed to be mine. So it mixed up somehow, but in the end it all worked out, and we got to meet our kids, and they were really lovely. And if you guys do decide to sponsor, like they'll send you photos of updates. Like I just got an email the other day of how like my kid was doing, like they took photos of him like drawing on like the pavement, and he was like doing math, and I'm like, good kid. He's doing well. But it's just something on my heart that when I was there, like I want to sponsor a kid because like when you see the situations they're in, it's tough, right? You see them at school and they're smiling and they're like having fun because they want to be at school. They don't want to be at home because home can be kind of scary for them. Their home can be broken. They might not have a dad. They might not have a mom. There could be abuse in the family, and being at home is scary for them. So when they're at school, they just light up. Like they have so much energy. They love their teachers, and their teachers love them. And so I think it was a really great program that we got to be a part of, and that, so if you guys are thinking of sponsoring kids, like, just do it. Yeah.
Les was telling us, like, there's also a really big need to sponsor classrooms, and that's how Yen got to it. So her previous sponsor child graduated, and then the option was given to her. You want to sponsor another child? Do you want to sponsor a class, or do you want to stop sponsorship? And to sponsor a class, it was only another $5. So from $45 to $50, you sponsor a whole class. So there's a big need to sponsor classes too. So if you guys are interested in that as well.
And with sponsorship, so in Guatemala, in the rural areas, the government likes to have it so that the schools only run to grade 7 on purpose, so that by the time the kids get to grade 7, it gets more expensive on purpose so that people wouldn't send their kids to school, so that in the end, they would just be junior high dropouts and just grow up to be low-paying workers for the government. So the government does that on purpose and is so corrupted. But if you guys sponsor like the child, like then they can go all the way up to and finish high school, which is super awesome, and then they can go to university afterwards. But that just helps relieve the family of having to pay for more schooling after grade 7. And just giving that kid a future, basically. So, yeah.
All right, the sinkhole. So this is probably my coolest experience. So before we got there, they told us it was gonna be like a 2-hour hike, and I hate hiking. And when we got there, I was like, oh, man, is it worth it? Like 2 hours? I don't know. But it was only like 10 minutes. Yeah. It's not bad. I can do it. So when we got, it was pretty high. So it's like we're walking, we kept going up, and then when we got to the sinkhole, you can see it's like, how many feet? Do you guys remember? Like 70, 75 meters or something? I don't know. Sorry, meters. Or feet? Okay, so 70 feet. And then, so, that's pretty, okay, and then, so we saw candles, just candles everywhere. And then he was explaining that the sinkhole was used for performing rituals, right? From witch doctors. And the witch doctors are they connect to the gods from the underworld. I don't know, some witchcraft stuff. And then they wear red bandanas, so and it could be anyone, and you hire them, so you pay them to do these for you. So what they do, you climb down, you like chalk, or I forget what it was. Do you remember? Sugar? It was sugar, so you know, like a circle, and then you burn like alcohol, everything, like candle, like anything. They just put it like anything in there, and then you just, I think they pray, summon the gods to for protection. They give them curses, prosperity, whatever the client wants. So, yeah. And then, so when we got down, it was like super steep and muddy too. So my shoes were in. And then, what else happened? So we got down, and then there was like a lot. It was like, I don't know, it was like 20, 30 of them. And then we saw one was still burning, so it must have happened like couple hours before. And then, so when I was down, it was like smoky, and like everything was black because all the smoke. And then I don't know, it was like, I felt like really like dark, and then like, I don't know, I can feel like the atmosphere was like spirits, like demons, and it's like entering the shadow realm. If you guys, okay. Yeah, you got me. You got me. It was like, I don't know, it was crazy, like, so, and so I felt so scared, and like, it was like, I don't, man, you just have to be there. So you should come next year. So, I don't know, I just felt like an evil, like, spirit just, flying, trying to, like, get us or something. And then, so the ritual, like the circle, we all stand in a circle, and then Hugo was he's one of the impact workers. He was just, he told us that we should sing a worship song, and then for God to be like, to put God, to have God watching us or be there for us. So the two songs we picked were, what was it? Great are you, Lord, and God, I look to you, right? So we were singing. I was singing too. And then, I don't know, I had like, it wasn't cold. It wasn't cold, but I was getting goosebumps. Because, I don't know, I was like, oh man, what the heck? I was like goosebumps everywhere. I was like, oh, maybe this is like, I felt like a magnetic field protecting us, like a barrier. And then I was like, oh wow, I think, singing, we're like kind of drawing God, to pushing away from the evil spirits, the demons, away. And then, I don't know, I was just like, oh man, it was like I just felt this heaviness, like, gone, like he like took it away. And we sang two songs, and then I think we prayed, right? And then we prayed. And then he told us to so everyone like go out, stay away, like find a spot and just pray, talk about, yeah, just pray, and then just pray, like pray about anything, and then like for 5 minutes by yourself, like everyone's by themselves. And while I was praying, I was like, just thank you for watching us. We're like 70 feet down. Like anything could happen. Like if it rained, we'd be drowning. And pray And I think we finished praying. We saw candles. We were like just looking through every candles, and then there was one candle really far, and that's where we took the group picture, right there. And then we had to climb back up, and I slipped and fell. Yeah. Huh? Huh? And then that was a sinkhole. Sorry, you just had to be there.
No, actually, can you go back? I just want to add something too. So the sinkhole, the purpose of this exercise was, like when, I don't know, for me, like when you see something like that, you're like, whoa, this is crazy, right? Like, how did this happen? Like, just this entire thing just like collapse, and now you have like this huge cave where you can walk down. But the Guatemalans use it as like a place of worship. And when they were telling us, they're like, when you're here, we're seeing it as God's creation. We're not seeing it as like a dark thing. We're not seeing it as like a place where you can visit dark spirits where the Guatemalans would, right? So that's like the purpose too of the exercise. And to give you guys kind of like a perspective, like the Guatemalans will only go down there with the witch doctor. Like they'll never go down there by themselves. And so there are certain times, so between, I think it was like 6 a.m. to like 2 p.m. is when they go down there to pray for prosperity. So they'll hire a witch doctor, they'll go down there, pray for prosperity. And then from 3 to like, I think 10 p.m. is when they go down there to pray because they feel like someone is attacking them. So they need to pray for protection. And then from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. is when they hire a witch doctor to go down there to pray to curse someone. So it's there's a lot of things that they use it for, and it's very like, I guess it's very like specific. And another perspective for you guys is, so a witch doctor can charge up to 10,000 quetzals. So that's roughly 2,000 Canadian dollars, okay? So an average Guatemalan man will work 50 to 80 quetzals a day, okay? That's an average for a Guatemalan man. Guatemalan woman would make around 20 to 40 average a day. So you guys can kind of put into perspective how much you have to save to hire a witch doctor, or how we like to say it, how much we have to save to curse someone. Because you're saving at least 3 or 4 years to go curse someone, so that must be a very petty and long argument, or a very long, like grudge against them. But that's just kind of like what Les was saying, like, it's very, the witch doctor is just ignorance, right? Like, they're just like, they don't know anything, so I'm just gonna charge them however much I want, and it's not even gonna work, right? Maybe it does, and I think Matt will get into more of it, but like, witch doctors and like more of that. But I think when you're down there and you're physically surrounded by the darkness, like that's all you're gonna see, right? Just darkness. And there's like that left photo, you can see where we're standing at the bottom. You can kind of see that like light on top was where we came down. But it was just like for us to be like, this is just another place that God created. It's nothing dark, it's nothing scary. So that's why they want us to sing and pray there, because it's bringing God's spirit down there, and God is surrounding that place to like bring light to that kind of place, and not to look at it as like a hopeless and dark thing. So that's also a really cool thing about the sinkhole as well.
To add on to that, the thing that they told us to pray about, like kind of adding to the bringing light to the darkness. So when we were there, the guides told us to set things straight with God. So I don't know about you guys, but like we prayed about our like sin and like the brokenness in our lives, and just like it's kind of cool because like you're in this dark place and you're praying about how we're setting aside our darkness and like giving it up to God, and then we're kind of like walking back up into the light. It's just this like little bit of imagery.
Yeah. One more note, I think, for just about the spiritual realm from the Guatemalans' perspective, is that they see things kind of like circular. There's 3 realms, right? So there's the heavenly realm, then there's the underworld, and then there's the middle realm, which is kind of like where we are. And you can get like everywhere. You can get anywhere within like the same distance, kind of say. Like earth to heaven is about the same. Earth to the underworld is the same, but the underworld to heaven is also about the same. So it's kind of like a circular thing. And so when they want to pray to the gods of the underworld, they'll go somewhere where it's lower and darker, like the sinkhole. If they want to pray for certain things of the gods of like the earth, then they'll just kind of go wherever. But then like if you want to pray for to the gods of the heavens, you would go to a place like Matt's going to talk about a little bit later, but just a little bit of background on that too.
Sorry, last thing to add on, like hearing all of the things about like witch doctors and people being like led so far away from God, initially it made me feel like very hopeless. Like in a country that has so much corruption on every level in the government, a country where like no one cares about the people, where people are just giving them wrong information and forcing them to worship like wrong gods, and they have no way of educating themselves because they don't have any money to go to school, and it just seems like an endless cycle of like sadness, I guess. I felt very hopeless when I learned about all of these things, and my perspective changed over the trip as like we were shown like how much God has worked through this brokenness. Like even though like the government of the country is like against God and everything in their lives is leading them away from God, like God is still working in Guatemala. And I think that's like, even in the sinkhole, like when we were singing and praying, like God was there in the midst of like all of like the brokenness and like all of like the evil spirits that they were worshiping and like calling upon, like God was still working in that place. Yeah.
Okay. So I had the privilege of serving in their medical clinic, and I think they had a lot of equipment for eye exams that they got donated, but they didn't know how to use it. So it was really cool that I got there. I'm like, oh, you have all the stuff. So what I did was I did a total of 4 days clinic, saw around 124 patients. I had a translator, and we examined mostly people, like the kids in the school, the staff, and the families of the kids. And there were some kids that live in the rural areas with family that spoke a different dialect called Pokemchi. So it was really neat because we would have to translate through a person that speaks English to another person. But I think it was God because I had patience for that. Usually I don't, but I'm like, okay, this is good. And it was just, I think it's really different when you're serving with like a heart to know that this is for God's glory and it's not for yourself. And so at their clinic, they also need medical and dental work. So if you guys know dentists, nurses, and any MDs, I think there's a lot of needs that's there. Another thing is, and the need is not just a one time. I think they were hoping that they can have people every 3 months, and there are some dentists that do come, different ones, because they have a lot of cavities, and it's due to the poor nutrition that they unfortunately can't, be afford, like just their part of their diet. So that was some of the pictures there, and that's one of the class that just brought sunglasses for them. So one thing that's really neat about the clinic is that when they call patients, they don't book people in, but they give you a time. They're like, hey, so from this time to this time, we have someone come in to examine your eyes. So everybody would come at the same time. And I'm like, what the junk? I'm so stressed because I'm so used to working. And I'm like, no, I need people to book in slots. But people there are like happy to wait. And some things that are very simple to us is just, it's big to them because they don't have access that we do. They don't have Google. They don't have just simple thing like going to the drugstore to buy an eye drop and stuff. So not only they appreciate that, but I think that there's a lot of need, and prayer is a big part of it. And it's frustrating, I think, because sometimes we think that, well, I think they'll talk about this during the hospital visit, but like for me, I'm like, well, she has cataract. She just needs surgery. Like, no matter how much prayer, she's not going to see better. But one thing that I learned is that who is to say that she doesn't have just as much joy, even though she doesn't see as well? And I think that that's one thing that just kind of opened my eyes a lot, because I've always been trying to think more of like the practical side, but God really showed me a lot of that at the clinic too. So on to the next slide. Another thing that Impact is doing is agriculture and sustainability. So they have the project called Seeds of Tomorrow. And here it's the project that they make greenhouses, irrigation system, and agriculture to make that possible. So just a little bit of background. I think 50% of the kids there, due to poor nutrition, have stunted growth. So like Guatemala is like the 4th in the world. So what Impact is doing is, as you can see, they grow tomatoes, and they're trying to grow more vegetables, because they also have a program that they feed the kids for their lunches. So they're trying just to promote that, to have more nutritional value to the kids and stuff. So what really was cool is, if you see there's Howling's Tomato, and that's a provider of tomatoes for Costco. And how they got to partner with Impact was, one of his daughter went on a school trip with them, and she talked to her dad and like said, hey, you gotta see what they're doing down there. And I guess by the Spirit of God, he actually contacted Les, which is the leader Impact, and he actually came down and set up like how to grow tomatoes, and you can see that greenhouse there, and that's like something that they helped set up. So that's really neat, and they're trying to look into growing strawberries, because strawberries are pretty rare there, and exporting it. And I like that, because I think they're also teaching the Guatemalan not only how to raise their own like sustainability, right, just to produce their own crops and stuff. So what I really took from this was how God kind of orchestrated this all together, and just He's really faithful to those that is with a heart to do His work. And Les was sharing, he's like, I don't know how this came along. There was an engineer that reached out to them and set up an irrigation system. So all these little things that came along, and there's a greenhouse company that came and set up, pretty much built the greenhouse. And so that was really encouraging to see. Yeah. From Holland.
Yeah. So I want to talk about devotions. This is kind of misleading, because these are all pictures from VBS. But it pertains to what I have to say. So I guess I'll start by asking, like who here had food this morning? Like, who eats breakfast? And then who eats lunch typically? Okay, who's concerned about any of those meals? And then who is afraid they don't have clothes to wear to go to school or to work, right? So with these kids, you have no idea what their home situation is like, and when they're at school, they're wearing their school uniform. And someone was saying it earlier, but oftentimes their school uniform is their best clothes, and it's like they're really happy to have something like that. And so we went to 2 devotions, and it was kind of neat because we learned that they have devotions every morning before they start school, and they just start off their day with God, right? Which is really nice. And then you hear that some of these kids have to walk to school, you're like, okay, well, like I had to walk to school, right? But then these kids are walking like a couple kilometers up hills both ways, like your grandparents. like we were talking to the principal one day, and after the first devotion, and she was saying when she first started working, there was one kid who they wanted to go do a house visit, so they walked. Was that an hour or an hour and a half or something to this kid's home, and then they got there, and then the place was empty. And then they asked the neighbors, and they're like, "Oh, do you know where this person is? This family is there?" Oh, they had to move. They couldn't live there anymore. They had to move, so you had to walk another 30 minutes. So they walked another 30 minutes. So it was about like 2 hours or something, 2.5 hours or something like that, to this kid's home. And they got there. It's like a dirt floor, and the kid's just sitting at the fire, just trying to like eat something or something. The kid was doing something, and the principal, she was really like sad because that child's mom walked that child to school. So devotions is at like 7:30 in the morning, right? So you're walking 2.5 hours uphill, drop off your kid, then you walk 2.5 hours back home uphill, and then you have to come back to pick them up by 12. So you're at home for like half an hour, and then you have to come back to pick up your kid, and then you have to do that trip again, right? And then, so it's just kind of sad to see. But so we went on one of our first days, we went to the devotion at a school called Chamche, and that was their original school. And it's really neat because you see these kids. The reason I was telling you about like the difficult life and things like that is that you see like on the face of these kids, like they worship God with everything they have, right? Because they don't have anything else. Their meal at school might be their only meal of the day, right? And oftentimes, like that's the kind of like the real, like that's when they get mentored the best. Like they get pastored from their teachers in a way, right? Like someone was saying, like I think it was Steph saying, "How many husbands will you have? One forever. How many wives will you have? One forever." Like the teachers almost act like pastors, right? And then, so we started singing, and we have no idea what they're saying because we don't know Spanish. But then you just see like a bunch of the kids just start lifting their hands, and they start singing and just really loud. And then during like an instrumental, like when there's just music playing, like the worship leader might start praying, or they'll just say a couple words. But then it gets really noisy, and you're like, what is happening? That's not like, those aren't instruments, you know, those aren't, that's not like the worship leader singing. But we had headphones in because we had our translation coming right into us. So I just like took it off, and then it's just kids praying. They're just praying, and they're like crying out to God about something. I don't know, it's in Spanish. But like you can just see that they're like, they just have faith in God, right? And it's kind of it's so contrasted here because, you know, we're Asian Mennonites, and like everyone kind of looks at you when you put up your hand in a way, right? During worship. So it's kind of cool to see. I think for myself, it's taught me a lot about God's been teaching me a lot about prayer and the power of prayer. And I think oftentimes in North America, we try to do things ourselves. We have like all the resources at our fingertips, like literally. We can Google anything we want. Oh, I have a pain here, right? I'm gonna Google how to fix that pain. And then WebMD tells you have cancer or something, right? But like, whenever you have a problem, right? Like, let's say you want to fix a hinge on your door, or how do you turn your house to vacation mode before you go on vacation? You can Google everything, right? Over there, it's just kind of like, they don't know anything, right? The government encourages you to drop out before you finish school. Your parents encourage you to drop out after second grade, because you make more money working then, right? Hey, you know math, you know how to read and write. That's more than I can do. Let's go make money, right? This bottom right picture right here, I just want to touch on that real quick. It was the second devotion we went to. We only went to 2 while we were there. And during that time, I know I guess chose a picture of Nancy crying, but yeah. I didn't really want to take pictures during, while we were singing and praying and stuff. I just felt like it was not a good time. But while we were singing, they started singing "How Great Is Our God," and then I don't know, it was crazy because I was singing in English and everyone else is singing in Spanish, and you just really felt the Holy Spirit at that moment. You just felt through the music we were worshiping the same God, right? And it was so powerful. I think pretty much our whole team cried during that song. And then after the devotions on both of those days, we had a hugging line. There's lots of pictures on Facebook. Probably half the pictures on Facebook are of the hugging line. But normally what they do is they'll choose a couple classes, maybe 3 or 4, and then they'll send those kids on a hugging line, and then everyone goes to class. But for whatever reason, both the times that we went to the devotions, they just lined up the whole school, and we hugged the entire school. So the first day, it was 280, and then the second day was 200 or something. And then, and that was the end of our hug line. We gave each other hugs. Yeah, that was devotions.
So just to touch up on that bottom right corner. So, so like Joe said, we were all crying. And then I think the part that got me the most was when we finished the song, the principal or whoever the leader was, the worship leader was, he was like, okay, kids, you see that there are visitors here. They're not from Guatemala. Obviously they look different. So how about we gather around them and pray for them? So at this point, I'm breaking down in tears because all these kids around me were surrounding me and praying for me. And I was like, whoa, I don't deserve this prayer, right? You're just I don't deserve this. I should be praying for you guys. You guys deserve my prayer more than you praying for me because I felt so unworthy, right? And even the first day too, when we rolled up to the school, and then I'm getting emotional again. And then we looked out, and all these kids were lining up waiting for us with handmade confetti. And they're just oh, they spent all morning cutting them up for you. And I'm I don't deserve this, you just feel so unworthy of their love. And they don't even know you, and they come up to you and they grab you and they hug you and they kiss your cheek, and they just, there's just so much love. And I'm just okay, that's the part where I felt really emotional because I'm I don't deserve any of this. So anyway, so they were you want to come up and say something? And I was still crying, and I was okay. So I pulled Jess up. Me and Jess were both crying up there, and I think I just told them, you know what, you guys definitely show me God's love because you guys surrounding us and praying for us, that's God's love right there. And then I just encourage them to continue showing God's love to each other because it's the best love out there. So that's kind of the background. And it's just very overwhelming, you're hugging 200 and something kids, and you're trying to see all their faces and just giving them a smile, but you're just so overwhelmed. And then also too, we were talking about this in the car going to the sinkhole because that school was near the sinkhole, and we were just so why do we cry during worship? Why do we cry when we're so overwhelmed by the Spirit? And for me, I didn't have an answer, but I was kind of you know what? I cry because, like I said, I'm unworthy of God's love, right? When you feel God's love, you're just such a sinful person. You're I don't deserve this, and then I start crying, and then but no, it was just an experience where when you feel you're receiving this love and this support that you don't deserve, it's very overwhelming. But it's definitely showing that God is real and God's love is there, and it's for everyone. So, yep, That's mine.
So we've we touched a little bit on Guatemalan culture with Steph talking about the beginnings of Spain coming to conquer, not settle Guatemala as opposed to settlers coming to Canada. They're actually called conquerors, conquistadors. And something interesting about that is that when Spain finally decided that they should settle Guatemala, no one wanted to move here. No one wanted to move to this new land. So what Spain allowed was that all their prisoners could be free if they were to, settle and inhabit Guatemala. So if you, just imagine letting all these prisoners, all these criminals, start a new country, let that kind of run in the melting pot for 500 years or so. I think this was in the 1500s, something like that. There's a lot of rich history there. In addition to mixing with the Mayan people and with their syncretism and animistic beliefs, syncretism being many gods, and then animism, like Steph was saying earlier, just attributing, believing that, inanimate objects, things, corn, sky, fertility, there's a god for all of those things. That's kind of the cultural, and it sets the cultural, but also the spiritual tone, or the backdrop of the country that we're in. So on this day in particular, we went to Shishim. So if you look on the top left photo, that's kind of a view from Shishim, and Shishim is just the name of the corn god, but it's also kind of the name of that area as well. So just from there, Joe was touching on how there's kind of three spiritual realms: an upper spiritual realm, a middle spiritual realm, a underground, underworld spiritual realm. So this one would be the top one. So they had, if you look on the bottom right photo now, that's kind of in the same area. It just overlooks the whole area of Taktik, the whole city, I guess. And there's two crosses there. That's a old spiritual, that's a very old, sacrificial offering ground. I'm not sure if you can see it, but to the right of that, there's actually a smaller cross as well. And Les was kind of teaching us about their beliefs here, and he said that sacrificial ground is actually older than the church, that cathedral that you see on the left side there. So just to give some perspective, that church faces, when you look, if you're facing out from the church, you look down, you'll see that cross, and there's kind of stairs that go down. So we're just sitting on these stairs here as he's explaining the culture to us, and it was very, very interesting because as he was doing so, there was 3 people that kind of came up to that site. So they would use it whenever, and one of them was a witch doctor, and then the other 2 were a couple. Now, we don't know what the couple hired the witch doctor to do, but they obviously paid him for his services to do something. In case you're curious, the witch doctor looks pretty normal until he pulls out a red bandana, and he'll put it on his head, and then you're like, okay, there's the witch doctor. And he did, someone was mentioning earlier that, they pour kind of a circle of sugar, of alcohol. They have various candles too. Outside of this church to that left, I think you can see in that kind of black area, that's actually a shack they sell a bunch of candles. The different colored candles represents, different things, blessings, prosperity, jinxes, curses, hexes. The black candles would be those ones, and even though they sell them there, it's interesting that they don't display them. You have to ask for them specifically. But back to this couple, they were standing there while the witch doctor was doing the ritual. There's a lot of circles in there because, as Joe was saying earlier, the Mayans believed in a very cyclical beliefs, even in their view of the worlds. And then, we all know about the Mayan calendars and 2012 or whatever. As we were learning about that, I think what was going through my mind as I was kind of little disturbed, a little uncomfortable. Like, should I be here? This feels a little creepy. Like, they're burning all this stuff. Should I breathe in this smoke? Is it okay? I viewed it very much as like very icky, like spiritually icky. I didn't want anything to do with that. I was kind of like, putting it on the level of like Wiccans or something, like when you think of the occult. But Les, like, he actually addressed that, and he was saying how a lot of their beliefs actually come from the Bible, actually. Now, granted, it comes from the Bible in ways that are twisted. When you open up, Leviticus, when you open up Numbers, they have a lot of lampstands, they have candles, they burn that. The exact same thing here. They have robes, they have burnt offerings, sacrifices, incense. They have all those exact same things here. It's just taken out of context. And Les was just reminding us that that's how the enemy works here, and that's kind of that's what they believe. And I don't necessarily ascribe to the belief that Guatemala is just a lot more of a spiritual climate compared to Canada, compared to North America. I just think that they're a lot more hyper aware of their spiritual atmosphere, their spiritual surrounding, probably due to two things. One being the Mayan beliefs that were already there from the get-go, to the Catholicism that was kind of mixed into that. And I think three, we talked about material poverty as well, and this sort of touches on to what Joe was talking about, where we don't really know a lot of these kids' situation or these families or anything, but we do know that most of them come from material poverty. And the thing about material poverty is that it makes you pray to God, because you don't have any choice but to cry out to God as your only option for your next meal, for the clothes on your back, for usually it's usually the next meal and the health that they worry about a lot. So Les was actually telling us they live in a cyclical manner in which it's like kind of survival mode, where for that day they'll think, okay, did I feed my kids? Did they eat? Did they had food in their stomach? Next, are they physically healthy? If yes, rinse, repeat for the next 24 hours. That's just kind of the cycle that they live in, and that's kind of what Impact Ministries is kind of working on helping to train and re-educate the people there as well. But as we were sitting there and looking at this, I felt, even though I felt initially icky about watching this ritual go on, I just felt, I don't know how to describe it. I kind of felt very convicted in that same moment. I kind of felt God speak to me in the sense, I just had the thought come into my mind, like, you're kind of judging them and how they've kind of twisted the gospel, twisted God's word, but what about your own life, Matt? Like, what are things that you've added to the gospel? And something that I remember hearing from Tim Keller is that you can't add to the gospel without taking away from it. So the gospel's already perfect because it's the way that God intended it to be. So if we add to the gospel, I want God, I want salvation, I want to be saved, I want to help further the kingdom, plus an amazing paying job, smoking hot wife, nice car, nice house, all that stuff. We add to that, and I use those ones specifically because they're very common American dream ones that we kind of think that we need in addition to, the Great Commission. Like, yeah, I want to do the Great Commission plus this, and that kind of reminded me of my own poverty in that moment, specifically my own spiritual poverty. I guess when we talk about poverty, it's important to speak about or clarify what we're talking about. Whether it's spiritual, material, or otherwise. And if you look in the top right photo there, that's actually inside of the cathedral. For those of you guys who have been here before, they did do a little bit of a renovation. It might be a little bit hard to make out, but right in front of Les, so Les is standing in the middle of the aisle there, all the way at the front, there's a statue of what looks to be Jesus crucified on the cross. Now, if you were to ask any of the locals there who that is, they would not say that's Jesus or Jesus. They would say that's the Lord of Shishim, actually. The statue's in black, and you can actually go up there behind the glass display, and we actually witnessed where some people would go back there. There's a hole in the glass where you can touch Jesus's feet, and then I'm not entirely sure what the significance is behind that, but they are worshiping the Lord of Shishim. Sorry? Joe says they're taking the holiness and putting it on themselves from the Lord of Shishim. So this whole area is dedicated to the Lord of Shishim. So while we were in here, Les took us to a room in the back there where it felt, this whole church, this whole cathedral, I should say, felt very spiritually heavy, very spiritually dark. To quote Doug, you just have to be there. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. But in this room, there were a bunch of plaques, and there were a lot of, there were just a lot of plaques, and they were praising Shishim. They're saying a lot of things. Praise the Lord of Shishim. He healed me. It's almost like a bunch of testimonies. When I was in there, it kind of felt like a bunch of like Amazon reviews of the God of Shishim. That's what I thought personally. But Shishim, like when you think of Shishim, think of like, I don't know, Baal, Astaroth, or like just some other god, Zeus. That's kind of the same idea here. It felt very heavy in there, and what Les had us do in that moment was just to declare who God is, to declare his character. Jesus, you are the Prince of Peace. Jesus, you are good. Jesus, you are the source of joy. You are the provider. Jesus, you are the Son of God. And we were just praying these things. I think Joe was telling me he wanted to say, Jesus, you are reckless. I told him not to. But as we were praying for these things, there's one or two women outside here just kneeling, and they were praying. They were actually like wailing, like crying out really loud. It got very distracting, but you really felt their need, whether it was spiritual or material, whatever it was, they really needed it. And as we were praying these things, we felt kind of the atmosphere get a little bit lighter spiritually. And it was a really good experience, I guess, to remind us that Jesus' name does have power, and it does have power over, all these other false gods, over all these demons. So it kind of, in summary of all of this, Les was kind of reminding us that it's not necessarily easier for the Guatemalans to come to Jesus when compared to North America. There is the factor that North America tends to be kind of walking away from God and religion more so. But what's going on here is that they're more, their brokenness and what's been stewing for the last 500 years has kind of created an environment where they're more ready to be harvested. Spiritually, like in a spiritual level, I kind of phrase that really weird. So, but they're a lot more open, a lot more, they're aware of that spiritual realm as well. So when you bring Jesus into the picture, and you have to be very clear about which Jesus, because they have multiple gods. I think Les was telling us they don't actually go by Christians. They don't call themselves Christians there because, the people worshiping here, they would, if you ask them, are you Christian? They'd say, sí, I'm Christian, right? So they actually identified as evangelical, which is evangelical there. So I hope that I touched on most things for Shishim, but yeah, that's kind of our experience with that.
We did a lot of home visits, and including like the sponsor kids' home visits. But the last home visit that we went to, we also made like tortillas, which was super hard. And then it was made by Angelica, who is in the right picture. And Selvin is the guy second to the left on the left picture. And we got to hear a lot of testimonies, and one that stood out to me the most, that kind of showed me how faithful God is and how to live life trusting God with your life and how to devote your entire life to Him, basically. And it was told by Selvin, and it was primarily reflected on Angelica's faith. And they were just so nice. Like, I mean, they made us these, I don't know, chicken, huh? Chihuahua. They made us these tortilla-filled chicken with tomato sauce. It's like a dumpling, but anyways, we made it with them when we got there. But our translator was saying that they actually spent all day making it for us for when we came, so they would have to eat what we made, which kind of sucked. But anyways, they were really hospitable. They had like dirt ground, and their house was made like of straw and concrete. Like it was like a tin roof. Sorry, and they had like really nice tablecloths on tables, and they even had candles lit up for us, and it was just so nice because they don't have very much, but they spent all day to make us these food / they had to eat what we made, and they like lit up all these candles, and it was so sweet. And then so anyways, at the end of the night, Selvin started telling us about his testimony, and it was like it started off with how as a child, like he grew up with, and around him, his uncle would have many women in his life. And as a child to a teenager, he told himself, like, I'm only gonna have one wife. Like, seeing like my uncle do this, like, I don't wanna do that, I'm just gonna have one wife. And Selvin grew up in a Catholic home, and Angelica actually was Christian. And so he met Angelica, and they had to go through the whole problematic family dispute of like, which religion is better, like, why aren't you Catholic? All these bad things are happening to us because you're Christian and you want to date a Christian girl, you want to marry her, and like all this stuff. So Angelica had to face like a lot of criticism from Selvin's family, and even when they were going to get married, their parents were against it, and so eventually, long story short, like, they got married eventually, and Selvin became a Christian. But still, Angelica still, up to this day, I think still has to deal with her mother-in-law being super critical, such a critic to her beliefs and whatnot. But that was one problem that Angelica had to go through. And then later on, they had like their daughter, and then they had their second child. And at 9 months, their son actually passed away. And as a couple, I can't even imagine how that would feel. Especially like at 9 months, like, I don't know if it's different, if it's like spontaneous miscarriage or versus like stillbirth versus like a child being born and later on passing away. But anyways, that was like a real struggle for them. And I think during that time, they, instead of turning away from God, I think Selvin told us that his faith and Angelica's faith grew even stronger because they just trusted him so much more, and they believed that he was good and that he looked after them and wanted the best for them. And here, like, we usually turn away from God and we always blame God about all these bad things that happened. But for them, it just like reflected so well on how much they trusted God and that He is a God of all creation. And I thought that was really cool. And then, so they are actually leaders of a church that was planted in their area. And so they end up raising like 4 children altogether, and they were leaders of a small group and just of the church. And I think a while later, Seven was sharing about how he didn't know what got into him and how he let Satan tempt him and what happened, but he fell into adultery, and so he cheated on his wife, and he what did he say? So he fell into adultery, and his wife didn't know, but he knew he prioritized his wife and his family, and so he owned up to it, and he told his wife that he cheated on her, and he basically said, "Oh, like, you can, if you want to stay and make it work, you can, but if you want to leave with the kids, you can as well." And Angelica, she chose to stay, which is crazy for us to hear because, like, why would you stay when your husband just cheated on you? And, like, we were talking about it as a group, and even in the Bible, like, that was, like, one thing that was, like, allowed, I guess, like, that, like, you can have a divorce if you were cheated on, basically. But Angelica decided to stay because she believed that God could help them through their marriage and help their family to be stronger. And that was really crazy for us. We were like, what the heck? Like, why would you do that? But I think it really showed us the faith. Like, it showed us how much they depended on God, and that without God, their family would be disrupted and gone, and it wouldn't be where it is now. And like Selvin summarized, concluded at the end that they're stronger than they ever were, and it took a while for them to get closer as a couple, but now they're like a really strong couple, and they love each other more. And if it's not by the grace of God, they don't know like how they could have done it. And just overall, it really taught me about again, like what the others have said, like how to rely on God and really believe that he with God can do the impossible. And like here we are believing that we can do a lot of things by ourselves, but we can't. And just to rely on God a lot more in my life. And from that, it's like what Joe said, instead of finding a solution for myself, when something comes up, it's like lifting up to God right away and praying about it, and then asking for wisdom and guidance with it, and then dealing with the solution later. So I think prayer is something that I also took away from this trip. It's pretty cool. Side note, as a group, like we got back, and I think we decided to dedicate like time out of our day to pray and just kind of apply the Guatemala trip to our lives. And it's pretty cool because ever since we made that pact, or like, I don't know, we voiced out our goals or whatever, I think since then, like every day I would wake up and like pray for like 15 minutes, and whether it's like actively praying or just like sitting there silent waiting for the time to like beep, like it's like time spent with God. And one of the leaders of Impact Ministry was sharing like even just sitting there and just admiring like God's presence, and just dedicating that time for him is good, because you're giving him that time and you're being intentional with it. And that's something I learned from the trip, and it's really sweet to be able to apply it to my life. And
Okay, so Hugo and Claudia, we met them, Claudia picked us up at the airport on the first night. She is one of the cooks at the guest house, so we basically saw her every day. And then Hugo is her husband.
he's one of like the translators and the guys that drove us around. They're a fun bunch. We usually have debriefs with one of like the leaders. Her name is Julie and Les as well. And they planned a night for us to listen to their testimony. And Claudia shared first. And Claudia shared about her relationship with her husband, which is Ugo. And they didn't really have like the best relationship or like the happiest relationship because she said that Ugo would be drunk or like it's just I guess he wasn't a fatherly figure for her. And they do have 2 boys, and their 2 boys go to one of the schools from Impact Ministries. And the thing about them is that they would go home and they would just express their joy about God and kind of voice their faith about God and what they did at school and what they learned about God. And they usually have church as well on Sundays, and their kids wanted their parents to go to church with them, so they kind of, I guess, like begged their parents to go, but Claudia obviously went because like she loves her kids, but then they tried asking Ugo to go, but Ugo didn't go, and that's kind of cool because they're only probably like, I don't know, elementary kids, and they're already kind of voicing their faith about God and kind of just showing like their relationship with God and like their love for God. So Claudia went to church, and then I think a couple months later she decided to devote her life to God. She became Christian, and then with their life, I think they were trying to help or get Ugo to come to church and kind of just voice their opinion about God as well. And then a year later, Ugo became Christian, which is really cool. And they have a 3rd child. Her name is Julie, and we also got to meet her. And they're really happy because Ugo shared that he was able to be there for her as a fatherly figure and to just like provide a better life for her, for their daughter. And yeah, so their testimony really spoke out to me because it has taught me to be more vocal about my faith, because I guess like majority of my friends aren't Christian, and especially at home, my dad isn't Christian. So just like the fact that like they're little kids and they actually brought their parents to church, and now they're like a happy Christian family. It's been years since like my dad and our relationship. So yeah, so it just taught me to be more vocal about my relationship and not to like shy away from it, and just to have faith in God and what He has, and just that God is always present. Yeah.
I just want to share something else, like kind of related to Hugo and Claudia, and just about the children's ministry. Wait, is there children's ministry? Oh, well, I just want to share like a testimony that one of the principals told. So, so basically, it's just like a reflection of how Impact has influenced their children to influence their parents, and how the children have shown God's love through the teachings of Impact and through the Word. And so basically, Les was telling us like how there was this kid who would go to school and he would have bruises and cuts on his arms, and then the principal would ask him, oh, like, what happened? Like, why do you have all these bruises and such? And the kid ended up like telling the principal, like, oh, my mom gets abused, physically abused by my dad almost every day. He comes home drunk, and the first thing he does is yells at my mom and then attacks her, throws chairs at her, and me and my 2 siblings would just jump in front of my mom and try to stop him, but we can't. Like, we just end up getting hit too. And he is like, I don't know what to do. I don't know like how I can stop this. How can I protect my mom? And the principal, like, this just shows like how
how like what a godly woman she is, like, or like how much love she has, because how she responded was, the next time your dad does that to you, like, I want you and your two siblings to run up to him and hug him and tell him you love him. And like most of us here would be like, dude, take your mom and run away and call social work, call the cops. Like, don't do that, like protect yourself and run away. And like that's not like a normal response, but anyway, so the kid like took that advice, went home, and the next night, his dad like got drunk and started yelling and throwing things at his mom, and the kids were like, I'm pretty sure the kids were like, I don't know what to do. Like, okay, should we do this? Like, how do we like get this courage to go and hug him? But anyways, they did. They ran up to their dad and hugged him and was like, and told him they loved him. And their dad just like broke down, went on his knees and cried. And I think the following week, the dad came to school and was like, and went to the principal and said, that's what my kid did to me, and that's all I needed. I just needed affirmation that there was someone that loved me and that God loves me. And eventually, like, the dad ended up going to church, like, because of the kids' love shown, God's love shown by the children. They led their dad and their family to church, and it's just like amazing, like what kids can do to touch their parents' hearts. Because I mean, yeah, it's just, I don't know, I was touched by that too, and it just showed me, and I don't know, with the rest of the team, like how we can influence children. And of course, like the children here they get annoying and they're always on their iPads and like always like, I don't know, super obnoxious, they talk back, but like we have the influence to inspire these children and inspire youth, and we have to take that to heart because they are God's children too. And it really showed me like how to respond to children based on the principles, response.
Hi. So I'm gonna share about our hospital visit. So this happened closer to the end, I think. I don't remember exactly when, but basically we're in Tactique, and how long was the drive? It was quite a while, but we drove like about an hour-ish. We drove to this other town called Coban, and it's like, I think it's the second largest city in the area. So about, just bigger than Tactique. And it's like one of their more major like cities, kind of like maybe like a Chestermere or something like that. But you drive through that town, and then out a little bit is this hospital. And what's kind of interesting is that this is the only hospital that is within a 100-kilometer radius. So you can imagine if there's an emergency, like you have to drive to this hospital, and it's like the roads are like, you know, like you're driving through mountains, and it's super bumpy, and it's like at least like, you know, an hour-long drive, and then like I don't know, like if you're like about to like give birth, like can you imagine the panic? But anyways, so sorry. So we got to this hospital, and I think like, I'm not in healthcare, so I don't know too much about this stuff, but even I could kind of tell that, like, you know, this hospital was like run down. Like, we went into the children's ward, I guess that's what it's called. The units are about the size of, I think, like maybe our units, but like there are like 8 kids like crammed in there. So they're like, yeah, so like the walls are just like lined with like the little baby beds, you know what I'm talking about? And then like the walls are like that, and then in the middle there's like 2, and it's like, there's just like people everywhere, and it's like, the room is like moist, and it's like warm, and there are so many people, because like there are the kids there, there's their moms there, and like the families there as well. So it's like it's like 20 people in like a room the size of like, I don't know. Yeah. Like maybe half of this room, something like that. But it's like, you know, a lot of those kids are in there for a lot of like different reasons, whatever it might be. But a common one is pneumonia. And it's kind of rough because a lot of those people that are in that room will also get pneumonia just because of how pneumonia works, I think. But yeah, so like all of those kids are going there for their own reasons, and then they get pneumonia in the hospital, and then like, you know, they have to do like even more stuff. And a lot of those kids, or sorry, it's kind of customary in Guatemala to not name your kids until they're, I think like 40 days old, just because you don't know, right? And we basically just went in there and prayed for these kids. And, you know, it was rough because we honestly, like, you know, we're praying for God's will, and like, it's hard because you don't want to pray that like God would heal this child, because what if he doesn't? Then like this mom is like, oh, like God did this or something, and like, you know, we don't want to be responsible for like, you know, so it's rough, but like, you know, we're just praying for God's will to be done to these kids. And like I think like half of the kids that we went to, so we like split off into two groups and we covered different wings of the hospital, but for my group there were like 3 or 4 kids that didn't have names. I remember specifically there was this one lady who was sitting in front of her child, and her child had jaundice, so he was under this like UV light, and there's this blanket, but like the look on her face was just like damn, like sorry, like she's just like staring at this I guess cubicle kind of thing, but it's like there's like uncertainty and anxiety in her face, and like, you know, like you talk to her and you can tell that like, you know, she's exhausted, and like, you know, she doesn't know what's gonna happen to her kid, and like her kid's 2 weeks old, and like it's so hopeless, you know, because like they're like, Les was saying that, you know, the clinic in their school is better equipped than this hospital. And it's like, like, man, like, you know, everyone in there just like has no idea what's gonna happen to their child. Like all they can do is like sit there and like, you know, feed the kid and like pray to whatever that like their child gets healed. And this was really hard for me. Like, I remember right before we went in, our guide, our translator, so Ugo is our guide, and we have this other guy named Edgar, and he translates, but they talked about the paralyzed man with the mat, and how they brought him in through the roof and Jesus healed him. And he talked about the faith of the friends, and how, you know, like the faith is what, like Jesus says that like the faith is what healed your friend. And this was like right when he said that, I was like right away like, holy, like I don't know if I can do this, because like I think a lot of you guys know that my mom passed away 2 years ago to brain cancer, and like we prayed so hard, but like, you know, like none of it worked. Like we had so much faith that she was gonna be healed. Like my mom, like herself was like, she was like making plans, like our next vacation plans, like in the hospital, like on her deathbed. But like this was so hard for me, right? Like going to these people and like praying with faith that like, you know, God's will would be done, and that like, you know, believing that God's will is good. I think that was the one big thing that really stood out for me in this place, was that I think I'd kind of forgotten about like, I think desiring God's will. in all that's kind of transpired within these few years. And I remember that night we had a debrief, and Matt actually talked about, I think he prayed or something, but he mentioned healing for for the brokenness in our hearts and whatnot. But at that moment, I actually realized that I had never prayed that for God to heal me in all of this. And I think this experience was so powerful because it helped me realize so many things that I think had kind of fallen out of place. So me kind of almost fearing God's will, and maybe as far as not recognizing that God's will is good, and realizing that I had never prayed for healing in myself or in my dad, and yeah, I think that's the big thing that I got out of this. And yeah, it's pretty cool, I guess, how God works.
Hello. Oh, no, she wants to add something. Huh? How did she do this? Can you say something? She's on mute? Did you mute yourself?
Yeah, I'm good.
Can you hear her? Where's the mic?
Yeah, just do it. You're live now. Okay. You're live. Hello? Hi. Oh. Yeah, I also wanted to share about the hospital visitation. Just because it was like there's one story that just I will pretty much carry for the rest of my life, and it's when we went to this bed. It had a baby who was 6 months, and it had an older lady, and I guess I just assumed that she was the mom, and she was just telling us how this baby was 6 months, and this is their second visit to the hospital, and the first visit was for anemia. Anemia? What's that called? Yeah, that. Yeah, and then the baby got healed, and the second visit was because he got it again, and they also found out that he had leukemia, and then I don't know, it was really sad, and then the lady told us that she wasn't the mom, that she was the grandma, and then we're like, oh, where's the mom? And this really young girl came out, and she was 17 years old, and she the father of that child is not really living with the family anymore, is not with them, but apparently he visits the hospital, and the whole story just broke my heart, and I started praying for them, and I don't know, there was I never felt so I never had so much faith in a prayer in my life, and just praying for the baby to just have peace and to be well, and and I started crying, and then she started crying, and then we just looked at each other, and then we were I don't know, I just nodded my head, and I don't know, I guess she understood or something, but I don't know, it was just God really taught me to really trust in Him, and trust in His will, and in His timing, and in His plan, no matter how hard the situation can be, and yeah. Okay, I'm done. Okay. So in Guatemala, we met 3 people who translated for us, drove us around, and taught us about the history of some places in Guatemala, and their names are Edgar, Hugo, and Irvin. And yeah, it was just like, when I first met them, I was like pretty intimidated by them because they were like, I don't know. Oh yeah, no, I do know. So like I remember going inside the school, and like we had to put in headphones for the English translation, and like I remember I just got distracted by like the kids and stuff, and Edgar would be like, no, like that's for later, like put on your headphones now. And then I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm so scared, and like it's so intimidating. And even Hugo, our driver, like he had like earphones in, and like his aux cord, we would see his aux cord, like it's not even plugged into anything, and then we're like, what the, like, does he not want to talk? Are we like annoying or something? I don't know. And then yeah, and then Irwin was like pretty intimidating too, and I don't know, like after, like it didn't take us long just to joke around with them and get to know them, and just to hear their testimony, and to just for us to learn about like their families and stuff. And I feel like they're such a true example of like God's people doing God's work, like 110%. Does that make sense? I don't know. Okay, and I don't know, like they could have just translated or like done whatever and then go back to the car, but they decided to stay with us, to joke with us, to like create this relationship. And like even like during construction, they could have just sat in the car and like just like laughed and like watched us as we struggle, but they didn't. Like even like they look pretty like old, but they're so strong. And like even Edgar, like not Edgar, Irvin, he would like shovel dirt, and then he would put it in Stephanie's like shovel, and then Stephanie would put it in the wheelbarrow, and it just like, I don't know, it's like an extra step, but like I guess like they saw us struggling or something, and they wanted to help us and stuff. Yeah, it's just like one of those funny moments. And they choose to not just do the bare minimum. Like they, like we really see like how much effort they put into building this, like the relationship with us, and making us feel loved and feel cared for. And a cook, Claudia, as well, she makes really good food. And I remember like when everyone got sick before we left, and like it was like the second day before we had to leave, we decided to stay home instead of going to Shikoi. And I was like pretty bummed out, but she just like came into the room with her nail kit, and she's like, do you guys want to do nails? And like I don't know, like I felt like so loved. Like she didn't need to do that, but she did do that. And yeah, and even the teachers there, like we learned that the teachers are kind of like pastors, where they just not only teach, but they like love the students, and some would even go to their houses and like really take care of them and love them. And it, like, God really taught me, like, whatever I do, like I should really do it for God and do it 110%, and not do the bare minimum, because it is God's work. Like yeah, even I want to be a teacher who really loves the students and care for the students. And but I'm not yet a teacher, and right now I'm a student. And like I want to carry this lesson of just this like, I don't know, this work ethic of, and this mindset of doing God's work in everything I do, and doing it to the fullest of my abilities. And yeah, that's what God taught me.
So that's kind of all of each person like chose something to share, and I guess I have one more thing to share. It's kind of an overall view of Guatemala. So before going, we went through a devotion called Helping Without Hurting, and it was kind of preparing us to go on short-term missions trips. And like in the video, it was like it clearly said like in 10 days, you're probably not gonna do much to really impact the people in the long run. It's really long-term missionaries who are really working with the people, living with the people, and like discipling them. And so they were like teaching us to like get off our like North American high horse and like think that we're better than them. And like even with that prep, I found it very hard to go down there and like not feel, I want to say superior, but like feel like I have a solution to all of their problems. Like with the hospital visitations, it was just like there are such simple fixes for this in like North American healthcare that like, and it made me feel like very, I don't know how to describe it. I don't want to say like superior, but like very logical. Like this should not be happening if you had like money and blah blah blah. And so when I went into this trip, I was very like, missions is going into all the world and sharing the gospel to the people who haven't heard it. But for a majority of the trip, we actually didn't really encounter non-Christians. We were mostly surrounded by Christians. And so to me, I was like, okay, then like, what is this missions trip if it's not sharing the gospel? And I think that my perspective on short-term missions has changed after this trip in that short-term missions teams are still useful. Like Impact Ministry has told testimonies upon testimonies of how short-term missions trip have helped them reach or help them spread the gospel in Guatemala. So I don't want to say that they're useless, but we definitely didn't see any of the like harvest that we may have helped planted, but we just heard stories. And so I think like through all of the stories and stuff that we shared, like this missions trip was really a lot about God teaching us about who he is and how he works in different parts of the world, and how missions can be about just going to another country and being a part of their church, being a part of their community, which is, I mean, what God calls us to do, to bless one another, to be a part of one another's life. And I learned that he doesn't just mean the people in your city or the people in North America, but it means people around the world. And that's why I guess I really encourage everyone to try or go on a short-term missions trip, even if it's not about spreading the gospel. But I mean, we've all learned so much about God, and I think we've all had personal stories about how he's impacted our lives and how showing us how he wants to change it for the better. Yeah. Thanks for coming out and listening to our stories. We do have more, so if you want to ask us after. There are a lot more stories. Yeah.
I guess we can have like a short Q&A, like a 10-minute Q&A if you guys have any questions. But otherwise, yeah, we'll just...
Don't jump on all at once. If you guys don't have questions, that's okay. If you guys want to ask us after, that's cool too. But yeah, we just wanted to keep it short, 10, 15 minutes. If you guys have questions, because we said the event would be from 7 to 9. It's like 9:15 right now. So, yeah. The question was, did any of us make lifelong friends there? And I guess I'll answer for some of us when we tried to make that happen for certain members of the team. wasn't the mission that we deserved, but is the mission that we needed. Anyone else want to answer that or have anything to say?
I think I'm going to answer for Jess, unless.
Do you want to talk about that girl?
Can I have a... Oh, okay. Yeah. When I went to VBS, there's this girl, and I don't know. I feel like she's like pretty similar to me, and like we played basketball together, and yeah, they won obviously, and it was just like we just started laughing, and like I was like pretty bummed out because I was like, oh, I'm never gonna see her again, and then I saw her during VBS, and like she recognized me, and she's like, and I was like, oh yeah, like me too, and like we couldn't like really talk to each other, but we would laugh, and then we would like worship and like jump up and down, and like she would teach me like the actions as well, and it was just like, yeah, every time we saw each other and every time we said goodbye, like it was just like such a big hug, and like yeah, like I really missed her. Like she's really good at soccer too, and her name is really hard to pronounce, that's why I don't know it, but yeah. But yeah, it was really fun, and I don't know, I pray for her. I'm done.
Tammy has a question.
Tammy. So the question was, how do you think your experience has changed how you come back and evangelize or spread the serving the community now? We all debriefed in this room spontaneously one night, and we're just talking about like, we talked about church and how we can come back and what can we, like, as individuals do to help ourselves get better. Not like how we're gonna come back and change the church. No, it's like, how are we going to change to be better people, to help to love more on the church community, to love God's people more, or to, I don't know, how does anyone want to kind of?
So when we left, one of our debrief was like, he's like, well, when does your mission trip end? That was one of the questions. And I think our mission trip is ongoing. We learned a lot, and we're not coming back to like think, oh, we can change. But like Leanne said, changing within yourselves. And I think that when you change yourself, people can see that, and through the way you serve, through the way you love non-Christians, Christian, and it's just what you do. Jess talked about giving 110%. I think we learned a lot about, say, Leanne, about impacting kids and learning to love kids and be patient with them and trust that, you know, they can be our future. So I think when I reflected on that, it was more for me to develop myself personally, and I think spending time with God and praying and reflecting more, just like quiet time in terms of what I can do and how He can use me. And I think that's what we started doing, and really relying on Him instead of, you know, first thing, let me try to solve this problem. I still think He puts people in our lives and resources for us to solve problems, but first is to seek Him first. And He has really shown that He's faithful through that. So through ourselves, that's, I think for me personally, is working on yourself first, and from that, and just be the light. I think it's pretty cliche, but it's really true. And it's every aspect, whether it's through you're spending time with a friend, it's through your working, or even just saying hi to someone, showing kindness to someone. So things like that for myself. And being bold. Yeah, that's it.
I think for myself, so just a little story. Les was telling us about how they get people to serve in their church there. So when they want someone, well, not want, but when they want to give the opportunity to someone to kind of set up chairs or anything, they'd say, you have the privilege of, setting up chairs on Sunday morning. And that kind of sounds silly. That just kind of seems like mind tricks, Jedi mind tricks, whatever. No, it's a privilege to plunge the toilet, right, Doug? It's like, like stuff like that. But I think that there's something worth evaluating here about their culture here that we can kind of glean and learn from, that it is a privilege to serve one another as brothers and sisters in Christ. Something that was pretty subtle, but we did notice it a lot, is even in their language of how they served each other, how they communicated to each other. They always called each other brother or sister, hermano or y hermana, right? They'd say, brother Les, hermano Hugo. It just kind of reflects in their culture of how they serve one another there as well. And a little bit to touch on what Steph was saying, so this is more like serving in the church, but then also serving at home as well. They have a culture of prioritizing, pulling your weight and like contributing in a way that actually matters a lot. A lot of the times these kids would actually be, bringing a corn home, like a bunch of corn on like a bucket on their head, and they'd go to mill that corn or whatever so they can make the dough. And these kids are actually contributing in a valuable way. That's very ingrained at a very young age. That story that she was talking about, how there was a dad actually carrying 10 chairs on his back in this narrow path for that funeral. That kid, he goes up to the dad in that narrow path. The dad can't actually go around the kid. And the kid's like, I want to help. So the dad, he puts his stack of chairs, takes it off his back, puts it on the ground, gives the kid one chair so that he can help. And in doing that, obviously, like it would have taken longer, but it's like that they value that. I really admire, I respect that. It's not something easy for us to kind of like learn, but it's like, I'd like to try. I'm not, that's all I'll say.
So the question was, do you have this need or desire to go back?
For me, like when you're on the trip and you're like, this is so fun, like I don't want to go home until you get sick and you want to go home. But I think I asked myself that like when I was leaving Guatemala, I'm like, would I ever go back? And the answer is I would go back. I just probably would find the right time to go back. Because like the last time I went to Vietnam, I went twice, but I went consecutive years. So I went like 1 year and then the year after. And then the thing that God really taught me was that the crazy thing was, so the first time I went to Vietnam and I saw those kids in their condition, it's heartbreaking, right? And then the next year I went back, I saw those same kids again. They were still in that condition, but they were still thriving. They were still living. They still had food on the table. Their parents were still there, and God was still there. So God taught me that I'm the same and wherever you go, right? I am the same and I am good wherever I go. So then when I was going to Guatemala and I was seeing these kids and like the way they lived and their situation, God was just reminding me again, like, I'm here, and I'm here and I'm working through them and in their lives. And so I was like thinking to myself, like, would I go back again and would I want to see the same thing? And I think, yes, eventually I will go back, but I think I need to give it some time so that my excitement can kind of die down. And then you kind of like reflect on it, and I want to reflect on it again and be like, okay, am I going back for fun again, or am I going back to like actually like see what God has done in this in the community or in the community there and in the people there. So right now I would say I would go back. It's just for timing and for timing wise, like I don't know when exactly, but I think it's a good opportunity too to like, because like it was actually helpful for like, you know, Joe, Yen, and Matt, like they went already and they were like, they helped and they kind of like were like, oh, this is what happened last time and this is what was done last time. So it was kind of just, instead of going into the unknown, it's like, oh, like this is kind of like familiar. So
I think for our debrief post trip, we with the helping without hurting video, it really, one of the points was don't be a short-term missions addict. And it was like, yes, you've been on short-term missions trip, yes, you want to go back, but don't keep going back to do the same thing. Like, there's already a ministry dedicated for that work. Your job now is to come back and create awareness and support from Canada, North America, unless you're gonna go back and kind of do long-term trips or go there with a different intention, whether it's like medical or be there as an English teacher or provide first aid and teach the teachers there. Like, don't just go there and do like sporadic jobs like this. Like, these kind of trips is more like, I would say it's like once in a while, like bring awareness to yourself and just kind of renew your spirit and see how God is working in different areas of the world, but don't just keep going back there and be like, I don't know, yeah, you can't just pop your head in and leave all the time. So I feel like the urgency is there, but it's not like if I were to go again, it would be like long term.
For myself, like I've been to Guatemala before. I think it would be a good opportunity to go back in a different capacity. Like if Yen went back to be like do her optometry thing, I would go back because they did want a videographer, but they would want one for like 8 months, which I think is a bit long. Have a wedding or something. Like let's say if Yen went back in a year or two to do clinics and things, I would be open to come back and like film or just do photographs, whatever they need, or also in the capacity of a leader if there's a lot of younger people going, because I think me going when I was like 20, 21 was so life-changing. Going back now, it's like a great refresher, but it definitely had a bigger impact on my life and the trajectory of my life when I was younger. And so if there was another team going, if there was another trip from this church, I would definitely consider it.
right now, what our team has done is we have shared with one another what we want to do to continue, like to not fall back into the pattern. So we've all dedicated X amount of prayer time each day, and we have to text it in the group chat when we've done it, a check mark if you've done it, a circle if you're in the progress, like, because let's say I'm supposed to dedicate 15 minutes to prayer every morning, and I only did like 7. I can do like a little circle, and then when I'm finished, I can send my check mark. But I think, and so far, it's actually been very helpful to have that accountability, to see, like, oh man, they already did it, and I haven't done my prayer yet, and to like actually sit down and set time out to do prayer. And eventually, I hope it won't be like, oh, I don't want to like look bad in the group chat, and I like want to do this. But from the church, I don't know. I think asking us, I don't know if this is like a long-term thing, but I think one of the things that Les encouraged us to do is when we do tell you guys these stories, like that we're not just telling you stories of, yeah, we got sick and we all threw up, but like telling stories of how it has impacted our lives into like how it changed us and how we learned from it. So I think what you guys can do is asking us what our stories are, but also asking us deeper, like how did that affect your relationship with God? How did that change your view of God? And what does that mean for you? Because then you're constantly being reminded of like what happened and how and what you saw and how you experienced it. So, yeah.
I agree with Steph on that. You guys can continue to keep us in your prayers. Post-trip. But yeah, it is a very hard question, but it's a good question that you ask about, what you can do as our brothers and sisters, as our church, to kind of support us, not. So obviously, we don't want to come back exactly the same as we left, and we don't want to fall back into where we were before we left. Because I think a lot of us came on this trip wanting to hear from God, wanting to experience God, wanting God to speak to us some truth in our life in some significant way. One kind of technical logistic aspect of the trip that I noticed, and it was pretty big, was actually the media fast. So we didn't have we did have our phones, but we didn't have any Wi-Fi for our phones. We didn't have any like cellular reception. And I think that was a really big integral part of our trip. And what made it so important is that we were a lot more relational. We engaged in the relationships with the people there, with each other as a team, with the impact team. I was telling our team when we were there how refreshing it was to be with these kids in VBS or school, because none of them had phones. None of them were just going to play on their iPads or their Nintendo DSs or whatever, Nintendo Switch, right? I think that's one of the biggest challenges of coming back. I think, I don't know if you guys felt it, but I felt it right when we got back into the airport. We had Wi-Fi again, and it just felt like we were kind of half dead again. Like, we're all catching up on our hundreds of messages. I don't have hundreds, you guys might have. But that's one of the biggest challenges. And with this, you kind of go back to what I like to call the God of Google, the God of, knowledge, or, so these are things that you guys can be praying for us, but it is really, that's kind of part of the continued challenge of how do we go from here? Because we can't just throw out our phones. You can't. Well, Joe left his phone in Guatemala as a donation unintentionally. But Yen says he got a new phone, so God provides, I guess.
Sorry, Jess has something to say.
Hello. I think one of the ways that the church can support like any leader is like we kind of talked about this too, and it's just like just a lot of like encouragement. Only it's like um, there's like this like cycle where you know when like I guess for me during like I felt like you know I would try my best and then like there would be a time when there's like hello.
Yeah.
Should I start over? Okay. Oh, I start over.
Just keep talking.
Okay. Oh, anyways, okay. So I think one of the ways that I guess we can support each other and what we learn is just like just just encouraging us like not just the Guatemalan team but like with everyone in church like encouragement and thank yous and like just asking like how our days or went and stuff like that because one of our like really deep talks in Guatemala was like I just talked about my experience where, you know, I would be burnt out, but then there was like no like I would say I was burnt out for like a year, and like there was like no like I don't know like it was, like it's okay like or like yeah it was like there was no like what's that word? Follow up with me and like I guess what I've learned like in Guatemala like they really like there's this cycle of working and then like resting and like having teams come in and encouraging that team and stuff like that and like that's what like I really admire and I want to bring back home where you know when we see like when we see DG or the worship team or like kids ministry like try their best and like do their best each week like there's that encouragement that they I guess they indirectly taught me and like yeah that really helps. Yeah, does that make sense? I'm done.
Okay. Thanks, Jess. Okay, so we'll just end the night there. If you guys have any more questions, you guys can come and ask us for more stories because there's a ton and there's a lot that God has taught us that maybe some of us didn't get a chance to share. But yeah, I'm just going to end it in a word of prayer. I also want to thank you guys for praying for us during the entire trip and reading our blog posts for whoever read it and just keeping up to date with what went on in Guatemala. And it really shows the community that we have and the family that we have here back in Calgary. And thank you for supporting us financially as well. And I hope you enjoyed this night, and thank you for coming out. So I'm just going to close up in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this night, and God, I thank you for bringing our church family, our brothers and sisters, your children here, and to listen to the stories that you have brought into our lives, the work that you have done in Guatemala, and the impact in ministry, their children, and the leaders that you have raised up, and the stories that come out of it, Lord. And God, I thank you for speaking through us tonight to share these and to deliver it to your people. And I pray that as we go out this night, I pray that we'll be able to take these stories to heart and just be influenced by them to grow closer as a church, grow closer to one another, and to aspire to be like the Guatemalan people and be like the church that you intended us to be. And God, I pray that your Spirit will just continue to walk with us And thank you for the church family and for the passion that they have for you, God. And I pray that we will continue to serve you and your people and love them, Lord. And I thank you for blessing us here in this place and for being here with us. And I pray this all in your son's name. Amen.